Support WrestleTalk!
Donate on Patreon.
Say what you want about NXT call-ups, but they are happening thick and fast these days. Some far thicker than others. Otis, the orcish sex pest. Because this week, Tommaso, Ciampa, Johnny Gargano, Ricochet and Aleister Black all made their main roster debuts on Raw and then had an encore on Smackdown just for the hell of it. Black even flushed sanity out of whatever crust punk New Year's party they're still at. It's almost as if somebody in charge of the main roster had no plan heading into the last 2 months before WrestleMania and just thought, why the hell not? Why don't we just gut NXT? Why don't we trample over 2 years of carefully plotted story that is all yet to pay off? Why not? We'll have them tag. Corey can say, they used to be called DIY, and that'll just explain it all away. Cole will say, these guys are great, so fun to watch. It's DIY time. And the problem is that Ciampa and Gargano are great, as are Ricochet and Aleister Black, and they absolutely should be kicking ass and taking names on the main roster to shake things up. And they all had fantastic matches this week, so well done, guys. But why now? Why when you have 6 other call-ups that you don't know what to do with because catwalking is not something to do? Why, when we are within 2 months of the biggest takeover of the year, where we can, wrap up all of the stories and move all these guys on with clean slates and business resolved, why suddenly forget that the context of NXT with these guys exists at all? Well, there are actually a few reasons, and pretty much none of them say compelling narrative. So, I'm El Fakador Laurie Blake, and here are the real reasons why NXT stars are being called up now. Falling ratings. To the casual fan hearing that both of WWE's weekly live shows draw in over 2 million people on average every week, sounds mighty impressive. After all, 2 million people is like the entire population of Slovenia tuning in to watch Otis Dozovic get so horny over Alexa Bliss that the end of his name fell off. But if you rewind the clock 20 years, Raw was pulling in nearly 10 million viewers at the very height of its powers. And since then, those numbers have done nothing but drop, and they still are. Just in the last couple of months, we've seen the lowest ever ratings for both Raw and SmackDown, and their averages for 2019 are the lowest of all time by quite a long way. With SmackDown Live moving over to Fox in October, ratings need to improve as the broadcaster is reportedly seeking at least 3 million viewers on average per show. Now, because of this, WWE is pillaging NXT because fresh faces are an easy way to make a stale product feel new, and it's also a good way of enticing the people who swore off Raw but still watch NXT back to the show. You like Gargano? You want Gargano? You want Gargano? It's over there, I'm gonna get. Which is all fine, but the problem is if you just bring them up and you forget about them down the line, fans are going to become frustrated and lose confidence in WWE's ability to book talent whatsoever. And I submit into evidence everything that has happened in the last God knows how long. Interestingly, Vince McMahon recently cited Roman Reigns' departure and the myriad injuries plaguing both brands as the reason for the decline in ratings. But the truth is that the ratings were falling for a long time before any of that happened, so it's just lying. Fans generally tune in to see absorbing stories and good wrestling, but it is impossible to create stories if every match is with someone the fans don't have a connection with, so fresh faces actually could make all the difference here. Talent is leaving. Since the beginning of 2019, the rumours about talent wanting to leave WWE have just increased massively. And they're not just rumours either. Ty Dillinger, The Revival and Hideo Itami have all requested their releases, and Dean Ambrose is not renewing his contract when it expires in April. Interestingly, they are all NXT call-ups who have had a rubbish time outside of NXT. Except Dean, who was just completely lost his mind. In fact, Lord Sneakington Esquire Dave Meltzer himself reported on Wrestling Observer Radio that all the unhappiness in the ranks is largely due to creative frustration, with many superstars getting tired of being booked poorly, or in many cases, not booked at all. So, with a bunch of talent seemingly on their way out, WWE could be plugging holes with talent from NXT. But they need to be careful that all of this focus on Ricochet and his flippity-doo-dahs doesn't alienate their other established stars. Because you've got to imagine from their perspective, they might think that, someone's leaving. This might be my chance to prove myself. But then instead, just some guy from developmental just turns up. You're back appearing on Main Event. WWE's main roster features nearly 100 stars. So it's not like they're actually short on talent to fill those gaps. You've got lads like Zack Ryder, Tyler Breeze, and No Way Jose literally conga lining up for a shot at the big time. Pressure from AEW. You may have heard that a little Jacksonville-based promotion has been making a few big signings as of late, and rumor has it, some of those folks might be quite good at wrestling. They're really rather good match manufacturer and company. Now, of all the obvious differences between WWE and AEW, one of the most important for this list is the way the product will be presented. Because while WWE is much more about stories and televisual moments over in-ring action, you have to imagine that AEW, much like New Japan or Ring of Honor, will most likely primarily use the wrestling to tell the stories, which could mean longer matches in general, but shorter feuds overall. We are not expecting months of Braun Strowman versus Baron Corbin level rehashing here. So therefore, calling up NXT guys who have been outside the WWE sphere for most of their career and know how to have an indie-style match, it seems like the perfect idea, because WWE needs to prove to the hardest of the hardcore wrestling fans out there that it still knows how to put on world-class wrestling matches as well as tell stories, something they miss the mark on more often than not. Kofi notwithstanding, Kofi is my king. Now, the AEW signings of the likes of the Lucha Bros, Kenny Omega, Chris Jericho, and many more shows that All Elite wants to give the best in in-ring action and are willing to put their money where their mouths are, which means WWE will need to find a way to compete with that before AEW confirms a TV deal and weekly TV starts at the end of this year, and NXT guys are probably the shortest shortcut to that you could possibly imagine. Injuries! It's no surprise that wrestlers get injured. It is one of the harsher realities to come to terms with, up there with those weren't actually Bobby Lashley's sisters. Realistically, you can train for as long as you want, but the fact is, wrestling is a dangerous profession, and that is responsible for many a broken bone, torn muscle, concussion, or just general boo-boo. Now, the issue is that WWE seems to have been struck with the curse of injuries just as their ratings reached their lowest point. Talk about kicking them while they're down, which usually makes for a hot wrestling angle, but not when it's a metaphor. To name a few of the folks who are out injured, you got Sami Zayn, Ember Moon, Sin Cara, Seth Rollins, Luke Harper, and Kevin Owens, who's either out injured or the dude now. In other words, though, people who would actually make the fans tune in. Because if you know that your favourite star isn't going to be on the show because they're injured, you are far less likely to watch. It is just fact. So what does WWE do to combat their injury crisis? Bring up new stars, of course. And what will they do when their other stars return from injury then? Forget about the new stars, of course. Probably. Anyway, it kind of all depends on how permanent these NXT call-ups are and whether the NXT roster actually just becomes a traveling company of wrestling troubadours who could appear on Raw and SmackDown before scampering back off to Full Sail with a lock of Sheamus's mohawk clasped in one hand, screaming, "I come bearing gifts, Candice!" Tag teams wanted. It's been reported across wrestling news sites and on The Observer by wrestling's Nancy Drew Dave Meltzer that WWE is going to slowly start pushing their tag divisions. And what do you need for more tag teams? Well, it's more people, of course. Twice the number, if my calculations are correct. The introduction of the women's tag belts is the most obvious sign of this push for tag teams, but as the women's roster is comparatively tiny to the men's, definitely need more bodies. Now, both Nikki Cross and Lacey Evans have been called up in the last 2 months, and there is talk of Candice LeRae, she of the Sheamus Mohawk fame, starting to work on the house show circuit. So, there are potential teams in there somewhere, like Cross and Evans, together. They could be the Lady Sisters. Now, on the men's side, both Heavy Machinery and DIY, or not DIY, whatever they're called, the Consciously Uncoupled DIY, have been called to the main roster to give it a boost, something that was sorely needed on the Raw side of things. Because while there are plenty of teams on the Red brand, the vast majority have been presented as useless jobbers, to the point that they will not be taken seriously even if they did start winning a few times. So bringing up tag teams and pushing them is definitely a quick fix, but it would seem like a much more intelligent and long-term strategy to work with the teams you have, make them seem good, especially when calling up DIY and having them just be fine working together has essentially destroyed 2 years of incredible storytelling. The brand split dying. The interesting thing about these last 2 sets of NXT call-ups is that none of them have actually been given a brand. And other than EC3, all of the other 9 stars have appeared on both brands, which is leading many people to believe the brand split is on its way out again. Because Triple H spoke about NXT as a third global brand on this week's Raw. So could this just be the start of a far more fluid roster? WrestleVotes on Twitter has reported that as well as the women's tag belts being defended across both Raw and SmackDown Live, we're going to be seeing a lot more stars flitting between the brands as they fancy. There is of course a superstar shake-up set for the week after WrestleMania, but is there really any point if the stars are able to wrestle on both shows as it stands anyway? Now, a completely fluid roster is difficult, of course, because of TV deals. And you've got the likes of Fox wanting specific people on SmackDown when that moves to their channel because they want exclusive stars to keep people coming back to SmackDown, and that is why they paid the bigger the bucks. But if the brand split is on its way out somehow, then WWE may want to have as many main roster stars at their disposal as possible, which means dipping their hands into NXT to make sure that both Raw and SmackDown have enough top talent to fill out both shows. As we saw with the last brand split, Raw drew the shortest straw in short straw history by just taking all of the tall guys for some reason, and then SmackDown got all the exciting talent that people actually want to see. Getting rid of the brand split and calling up more guys from NXT would allow for a wider variety of matches, which would be a welcome surprise for many who watch the same matches on Raw week in, week out. Poor Ollie Davis and Luke Owen. WWE deluded. It was reported the other day by Dave Meltzer that apparently Vince McMahon suddenly decided that WWE's current product is stale. Yeah, duh. It's so stale you can feed ducks with it. He also decided that the current main roster aren't going to be superstars, so asked for the 4 top guys from NXT to be flown in especially. Now, it's a proven WWE formula that bringing up new stars to the main roster is something that people really like. And so, if you want to try and give the ratings a bit of a boost, why not just bring them up? The unfortunate side effect of bringing up stars every couple of months, though, is that it isn't particularly surprising anymore. Particularly when you come out and announce all of those call-ups before the show actually starts. But especially if you just blow your load on the whole thing this week. There was definitely room to do half of the call-ups this week, half of the call-ups next week, 1 call-up a week for the next 4 weeks, or 1 call-up in the lead up to Fastlane and then a big match. I don't know. I don't book things. But really the major takeaway or theme running through all of this is that WWE just seems to want a very quick fix, and it seems to think that NXT call-ups or cameos or whatever the hell they are will be enough to keep the engine running at least until WrestleMania. But you never know, the wheels might come off around Fastlane. Click the screen now for more great WrestleTalk videos and become a WrestleTalk pledge hammer on Patreon, joining a 1,000 strong army of SWAF Nation legends and getting access to exclusive podcasts, shout-out, and entry into the Wrestle League for predictions-based warfare. I've been El Fakador, and that was Lucha.